Hi, Paul. Paul K. Ainsworth. It's great to have you with us today to explore the idea of sustainable school improvement. Now, Paul, you've had a long career in school leadership and improvement. You've been a head teacher. You've held executive leadership roles in some different multi-academy trusts. And currently, for the last 5 years, you've been education director at Infinity Academies Trust, which is a trust of currently, I think, 13 primary schools. So I wonder, has your approach to school improvement changed over time?
That's a really interesting question, Liz, and thanks very much for finding the time to talk to me this afternoon. I think your school improvement approach does change. If I go back too early on in my career when I was a head of maths, that's probably the first element of school improvement I did, where I went into a maths department in a secondary school that was one of the least performing areas of the school. I'd look at the English data, and the English data was 20% higher than the maths data. And it was, well, what do I need to do here? How do I improve this department? I've got my 5 teachers plus me 6. What do I need to do? So at that time, it was try and create a plan, try and create a way of working so that everybody knew what they were doing, get some really consistent schemes of work, make sure the school behavioural policy is used really clearly, all things that are now very much commonplace in today's education in terms of having those really clear medium-term plans. I suppose at that time I was quite prescriptive, and also I very much believed that let's get the mechanisms of the way that we work in place, and teachers will teach. And I suppose that was the way that I worked. And I was just working in that little environment. You then go through to working in a secondary school and being a head teacher of a secondary school and working with a much bigger group of colleagues. And that understanding maybe at that point that people in a maths department will do something different from a science department, who will do something different to a PE department, and being conscious of those skills and those ways of working across the school. And probably as a head teacher, I gave quite a lot of license to my individual subject leaders. I allowed them to pursue their own visions and kind of work in a way that suited them. I then moved into an executive role with a large multi-academy trust. It was working with a high proportion of sponsored schools. So these were schools that often in areas of high economic deprivation, been struggling for quite a long time. And change was needed very quickly. These were schools that couldn't sit there for longer and longer and longer. They've maybe had 2 inadequate judgments already, and you're under pressure to improve things. And that probably took a different way of improving schools. And then moved into a second multi-academy trust, and I took that learning from there. And probably the way that I improve schools has changed less over the last 5 years. I think what I've begun to do is hone the way that I do things and be clearer on the way that I believe that we improve schools best. It's a polarizing topic. Not everybody believes in doing things in the same way. There are different viewpoints out there. And whilst not trying to be too polarized, trying to pick a middle ground, I certainly will do things in a different way to other system leaders. Equally, there'll be quite a lot of system leaders that work in a similar way to me. So yeah, my style has changed. I think it changes according to the type of schools you're working with, the colleagues that you're working with, the skills and abilities of colleagues, and also moving into the primary sector. That takes a slightly different route. Some smaller schools, but teachers teaching an awful lot of subjects requires maybe a different way of looking at school improvement.
Thank you. Yes, it's often, isn't it? There's those discussions around prescriptiveness, direction. But I think one word you've used is consistency. And I suppose consistent is a term that we could be used in different ways, doesn't it? Being consistent, I guess, doesn't have to mean everyone doing the same thing, does it? Would you say that is consistency, that idea of focusing on small things, keep going on them, is that part of your approach and thinking?
I think that is part of my approach. I think consistency is a kind of a huge term, isn't it?
Mm.
Let's start off with, I have the luxury of visiting 13 primary schools at the moment. They're looking for me being consistent in the way that I behave. Everyone knows how hard it is when the leader walks in or somebody walks in and you just don't know how they're going to be that day. And I think that's the first element of consistency is how we manage our emotions, how we manage our challenge, how we manage our praise. That all requires a level of consistency, whether you're, in the position I'm in, working across 13 schools, or if you're leading your own phase in a primary school or leading your own subject area. So you're looking for that level of consistency. I think consistency is different from standardization. I think consistency is a group of people in terms of school improvement reaching a collective agreement on what they're trying to achieve. I think that it's working with people, and then to me, consistency isn't identical, but it's that golden thread that runs through, so that you're in the same school. Sometimes I've visited schools in the past and I'd walk from classroom to classroom, and each classroom could have been a completely different school. Equally, I've been in schools where every classroom looks absolutely identical, and it looks like it's just come out of a factory. And I feel a little bit uncomfortable in that environment as well, because teachers are teachers, children are children, we're all people. So to me, consistency is agreeing the way you want to do things, seeing that relationship between them as you walk around the classroom, walk around classroom to classroom, or from department to department, or phase to phase. I think it allows teachers to put a little bit of their personality on it. I don't want it all different, but I think it allows people to just, show their passions and their enthusiasms and those kind of things. So yeah, that's consistency, I think, is really important. I don't think we can. I think it's really tough for children if they go from one classroom to the next in a secondary school and it's completely different. They don't know where to look in the classroom for support. They don't know how exercise books are set up. They don't know how the lesson's structured. The behaviour systems might be different. That's incredibly hard for children. Equally, in a primary school, when children spend that whole year with one teacher in a classroom and then they move to a different classroom with a different teacher, you don't want that to be entirely different for them to make it feel like they're changing schools. You want them to build on what you've done before. And that's where I think that consistency is so important in enabling children to perform and achieve. And I think even more so for those children that find learning difficult. Those children who've got reading difficulties or dyslexia or struggle to regulate themselves. I think that they need that consistency so they feel secure in what's happening. And we all know it's difficult when you move from teacher to teacher. So that consistency allows those children to, perform and kind of not get stressed, to, use the modern term, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can think back to children in secondary school who would behave completely differently in different classrooms with different teachers. And sometimes students almost like having to would come into my classroom and kind of recalibrate. Oh, here's how I behave here. So, but if we want to think about sustainable school improving, school improvement is tough, isn't it? Being in schools is tough. And if we want people to be able to stay, be effective, achieve, and not burn out, what kind of lessons have you learned around making school improvement sustainable?
So there's two books that I've written, or two books recently, and one's called No Silver Bullets Day in, Day Out School Improvement. And the second is called No Silver Bullets 2.0, The Heart and Soul of School Improvement. I wrote them the wrong way round. Number two is the one that you should read first. So in the second book is about how I explain how I feel you should improve schools, and how you should work through that process of what school improvement looks like. And I was thinking before, I spoke to you about how would I structure, that for somebody new to school improvement? Because yeah, it is tough. It's not easy. And I think it's very easy to get off on the wrong trajectory, trying to move too quickly or move too slowly. That kind of thing. There's a great line by Martin Hannett, who's the producer of Joy Division, who said, "I want you to play it faster but slower. I want you to play it louder but quieter." And sometimes school improvement feels a little bit like that. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? And I think you only get that over experience, that kind of speed of which you want to work. So there's so many factors in there, and then you've got the personalities of the people you're dealing with, and all those kind of things. So I think of school improvement in almost three kind of little buckets, I suppose. And you can't, the best way of thinking about that is using the old Simon Sinek golden circle, and that to me is a really good structure for understanding school improvement. So as the book says, start with the why. So why are you trying to do what you do? What is it that gets you up in the morning? What is it that drives you? What is that central tenet within you that kind of makes you do school improvement in the way that you do? It could be that, you went to a school that wasn't great and you're desperate that other children don't have that experience. It could be that you've been a teacher in a really tough school and you want teachers to have a better experience than you. It might be you had a difficult leader in the past and you don't want colleagues to go through that experience. And equally, from an organisational perspective, what's the why of the organisation? What's the mission statement? What's the vision? What's the values? And that needs to be the start of the school improvement process. Because, as I said earlier, if you're in a school in high challenge, that improvement needs to happen yesterday, and that leaders are banging on your door expecting you to make changes really quickly, you're going to have to work in that kind of way, because that's what's expected. There will be other organisations that take a longer term view, and then that's a different way that you work in school improvement. So I think understanding that why is the first aspect, your own personal why, but the organisation's why. Because if you can't get those to match up, you're just going to be fighting against each other. You're going to be fighting against your own emotions, your own views, but also your staff. So being really clear on that, I think, is the start of the school improvement journey, and sharing that with staff as well. Why are we doing what we're doing? So I believe in, I want children in my area where education performance is not really high. I don't want them to be disadvantaged against children nationally. I want them to have the same advantages as children in neighbouring counties. So that means we have to raise attainment, because it isn't high enough at the moment. So that's almost a central focus of my why in terms of my school improvement, whilst trying to bring people with me all the time. I want to work with people. I work in a part of the country where there's never going to be lots of teachers. We have to develop the teachers we've got and work with them and keep them. The teachers that we've got are the important people. So that means I maybe work in a school improvement way differently than maybe some other colleagues will. So that's getting that why understood, first of all.
That's interesting. It made me think, is it Dylan William who talked about loving the ones you're with? And that's what you need to do. Yeah. So that's your sort of first part of the bucket, starting with your why. What would be the second thing?
So the next one is, how are you going to do it? And to me, I don't know whether it's because I come from a mathematics background, but I believe in structures and processes. So I want something that's really clear, so colleagues know how the school improvement cycle works. Now, if we went back in time, the school improvement cycle would just be an annual thing, wouldn't it? You'd write what we would have called then a school development plan at the start of the year. That would be cascaded down to subject leaders, who would write their department development plan, or in a primary school, their phase development plan, and you'd work through that, and that would just be the year, wouldn't it? And then you get to the end of the year, you'd wait for your external results, whether they were Key Stage 2 or GCSE, and then find out how you've done, and then start the process again in September. That's kind of a real old-fashioned way, I think, of doing school improvement planning. I think that you've got to chunk that down and try and view your school year into sections. So whether you're going to go for long terms, whether you're going to say, well, what am I going to try and achieve this term? What am I going to try and achieve the next term? Or whether you break it up into your data cycles. So if you're in a secondary school, you might base it around your year 11 and year 10 mock examinations, whether you do 2 or 1, and then your final exams in the summer. In a primary school, you might have a similar type of process. So then you're looking at what you're achieving over each data cycle, and then what you need to do next to maximise your pupil achievement. So I think being clear on that cyclical nature. I also think that school improvement's a really emotional thing. It's that emotion has to be part of it. So I work in almost a 4-part plan whenever I'm doing school improvement. So my non-emotional words are evaluation, plan, execute, review. But if I put in the people-centered bit, we're evaluating with honesty. So at the start of the process or at elements in the process, evaluate with honesty, being really truthful to ourselves and colleagues about how we're performing. Then my next stage is plan with empathy. There are situations where people will just take one plan from one school and just put it into the next school, or a trust will almost write a uniform plan. There it is, that's the plan. Or you've worked in one school, it's worked, I'm just going to take that plan, etc. I don't think you've got the empathetic view of where the school is, where the children are, where the staff are, where the community is. And that's why I think that plan with empathy is really important. And that helps you gauge the pace of improvement better, because you know what's been done in the past. And we have a terrible habit in education, I call it plumber's syndrome, where every time somebody comes into a school, they say it's bad and who did it the last time. And, if we've been lucky enough to get a plumber, I'm sure we've all been used to that experience of, I don't know who did this last time for you. Don't know who it was. It's not very good. We've all had that scenario, haven't we? Whether it's whatever tradesperson it is. And
Absolutely.
apologies to tradespeople, and I hope I can get another plumber in the future. There are other plumbers that are very good and do not do this, honestly. So there is that plan with empathy. And then I think, and this is the bit that, again, we don't always get right, execute with confidence. I think a really important part of our leadership is giving our teachers the confidence to deliver, or in a system leader role where I am, giving my head teachers the confidence to deliver. Because otherwise they're constantly second guessing, am I doing it well? Is it any good? I'm lacking confidence. But no, I want people to go out there, they're good people, do the job you've been trained for, do it well because you are good. And I want that execute with confidence, really importantly. And, the great example to me always of that was, Sir Alex Ferguson at Man United, when he'd say to the team, go out and enjoy yourself, lads. And I know it's a kind of, it's a Boise comment, but it's so important, isn't it? Go to your classroom and enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy working with those children. Listen to those funny comments. Have those smiles. Do the job well. Do it confidently, and and everyone will gain out of that. And then the last thing, is my review, and that's review with humility. We're not always as humble as we should be. And I think humility is a superpower, that really honest view of, I didn't get it right. I didn't get it right. What can I do next time? Rather than I didn't get it right, it's somebody else's fault. And I think so that is my how of school improvement. And that's what I talk about in my second book, The Heart and Soul of School Improvement. That to me is the important thing. It's the cycle, the evaluation, the plan, the execute, the review, but also thinking about the way you're doing it. You're doing it honestly, you're doing it empathetically, you're doing it confidently, and you're doing it with humility. And I think if we get those things right, we really believe a school that is a self-improving school, a sustainably improving school, rather than the bang and bust that we sometimes see.
Amazing. And I wonder, is it sometimes difficult to get other people on that journey, or to convince other people about that kind of approach? And how do you take people with you?
It is difficult, isn't it? Because there's so many conflicting messages out there. But then that goes back to your why, doesn't it? It's about it's about the children is one of the best phrases in education, but is also one of the most dangerous.
Interesting.
It's all about the children.
Yeah.
It's all about the children performing as highly as they can. It's all about the children getting the best opportunities. It's all about the children having the best life chances. It is, but actually you can only manage those things by the teachers and colleagues you've got being able to do their best. So if it's all about the children means that teacher's not doing what you want them to do, and you're kind of setting up a situation that's really tough for teachers, that can't be all about the children, because they're not going to perform, they're not going to execute with confidence, are they? If they're under the cosh, so to speak. So yeah, working with colleagues, kind of talking about that why, you know, being empathetic, as I said, being empathetic about what your time scale is, what can you achieve. You're probably not going to double the results in a year. That's probably not going to happen. So where do you want to get to? But what's your honest trajectory about what is possible? I've worked in schools where attainment has been dreadfully low, so low you wouldn't believe. In my first secondary school, 14% of children got 5 GCSEs at grade C. 1-4 was where I started my career. You wouldn't set a target of getting to 60% in 1 year. You might be trying to get there in 3 or 4 years. I worked in a primary school where the Key Stage 2 outcomes were 16%, 1-6. I've worked in some of the most challenging schools that you can find. You can improve them. Sometimes it improves really quickly, does improve really quickly, but when they improve really quickly, it's because you've set a sensible trajectory, and actually the teachers have just massively outperformed, and the children have massively outperformed. But it's been done in the right way with people. So yeah, bringing people with you is so important. Making sure they're invested. And that's why, when we talked about consistency and standardization. Some people use standardization and the teachers are completely invested in it. They've gone into that school and know everything is standardized, and they bought into that at that point in the process. Where standardization is really challenging is when you take a school from the outside and then try and standardize everything, and those teachers hadn't bought into that. The people who gave you the job might have done, but the people who are in the school, they're on a different journey. So yeah, bringing people with you is so critical. And that's, back to what I said, empathetic.
So what's the third step then?
So that the third step is obviously, the what. What do you do? What do you do? And so an element of that is, do you standardize? Is that your approach? I'm so used to people looking for the silver bullets. What's the magic thing that I can implement in my school that's going to that's going to transform things around? There aren't silver bullets. They do not exist. There's great curriculum tools that, when executed really well with good CPD, can make amazing results. But actually, one curriculum tool is probably no more effective than another curriculum tool. I work in primary at the moment, and the debate over which is the best phonics scheme will go on forever and a day. And there isn't a best phonics scheme. It's about how you use it. In the same way, if I go back in my career, in secondary schools, when we were trying to work out which exam board gave the highest GCSE results, we all had debates about that. If you're an English teacher saying, "Oh yeah, well, I think WeJack," the old Welsh board that maximises my English results.
Yeah.
I'd be saying in maths, "Oh, it's definitely OCR. It's definitely the
Yeah.
OCR exam that's going to do it." There aren't, are there? There aren't silver bullets. It's about how you use them. So I don't think those are the answer. I don't think there is a silver bullet. I think there is about finding really high quality curriculum tools and using them well. Or if you're planning them inside your own school, that again, you go for quality. So the debate about whether you develop your own curriculum or whether you buy a curriculum, part of that's on staffing, part of it's on capacity, part of it's around finance. I don't think it really matters as long as people use it well, in whichever that approach is. I do believe in a lot in what we call the aggregation of marginal gains. Find little things and keep making them a little bit better. What's the one thing that I can do this week that's going to make a difference? Okay, we're really working on behaviour at the moment. So as a senior leader, what's the little thing that I can do that can make a difference? Okay, I know a certain year group is challenging in the school at the moment, whether it's my year 10s in a secondary or a year 5s in a primary. Okay, as a senior leader, I'm going to make sure that I'm around at change over time, and my team's going to be around at change over time to just calm things down. It's a little action. It's not going to set the world on fire, but those little actions add up to make things happen. One of the difficulties with that aggregation and marginal gains approach is when people try and do too many at once. I've heard it memorably the spaghetti approach. I'm going to pick up a pan of spaghetti. I'm going to throw it on the wall. I'm going to see how many pieces stick. Well, that's not sustainable in school improvement. So find the 2-3 tasks that you're going to work on as a school, this week, next week, and then what's going to be the next things. And that's what I wrote about in my first book. Was I came up with 108 little strategies that I'd seen used successfully in different schools. And I'm not saying they are the magic answer. I'm saying here's 108 little things that people have used. Don't throw them against the wall like spaghetti, but try and pick out 2 or 3 of them, work on them with your colleagues, discuss them with your colleagues. Then once you've done them, go on to some more. Alongside all of that, it's about making the colleagues or helping the colleagues get more effective. And to me, that's coaching and CPD. I'm blessed in the job that I do, that I work with a whole range of head teachers. So the most important thing that I can do in my job is to help head teachers get better at being head teachers. There's a CEO that I know, and he says the most important thing he can do in his job is to help his executive leaders get better. So if we keep transforming that down, what's the most important thing a head teacher can do? Well, depending on the size of the school, it's either help their senior leaders get better or help their teachers get better. The best way of doing that is by coaching, in my opinion, with good CPD, so people know, to use a phrase, what a good one looks like. And to me, that's the most important part of CPD. What does good look like? Not what excellence looks like or what one person can do, one day in the whole year, but what does good look like? Because we know what good looks like by coaching conversations, and we can then talk to people and use the aggregation of marginal gains of individual colleagues about, well, if you looked at your body position in that classroom, I noticed when I was in that year 2 classroom, you've got your back to 20 children and you can't see what those 20 children are doing. So how can we change your body position so you can see all the class? Now, you're not just going to remember that the next day and do it every day from then on, those atomic habits that James Clear talks about. So how can we habitualize that? And those little conversations, those little coaching conversations that we have. I might talk to head teachers around dealing with difficult people. How can we set ourselves up to deal with difficult people? What's the coaching? How do we set our conditions to enable us to do that most effectively? And then get them to reflect on that and continue that conversation. So those are my what's, aggregation and marginal gains. I do believe in consistency. Some people like standardization. It's a polarized view. Aggregation and marginal gains, coaching, don't use the spaghetti approach.
Amazing. Thank you, Paul. Andy, we've mentioned a couple of books and authors there in passing, Simon Sinek. James Clear, Atomic Habits. I've read, great book. Anything else that you've been reading recently and been inspired by or taken on board?
Or we're always reading, aren't we? It's how do you learn? So whether it's reading or podcasts are kind of the new thing, isn't it? It's what have you listened to? I I saw something on LinkedIn over the weekend, and it took me back to a book that I read in, I think, 2009. And that was a book called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. It's not a very well-known book. It's very simple to read. It's very American, but I still think 15 years on or 10 years on, it's the best education leadership book I've ever read, or the best leadership book I've ever read. I read it on a plane. I think I might have been flying over to, I don't know, the Canary Islands or somewhere out of season with my family. I read it once, and then I started reading the book again, and it is completely scribbled on. So if there's one book that I'd suggest, multipliers, and I'll send you a blog link so that if people just want to have a little look at a couple of blogs I've written,
Amazing.
they could then look at that and then
Mhm.
decide if they want to read the book. But I think it's sometimes quite good to pick something out that people won't have heard of. And that to me is one of my little go-to secret books, that I think is well worth a read.
Amazing. Thank you. And I guess just as a last question, is there any final bits of advice that, based on some of the things you've learned, anything further you would give as advice to someone setting out in a school leadership role?
It's not easy. Um, I think you have to find your own way. We all have our own style that matches, what we're good at and kind of covers up where maybe what we're not less good at. Try in education, we have a terrible habit of focusing on the things we're not good at, but actually focus on the things that you are good at. If you're lucky enough to be part of a team, build a team whose strengths complement each other. Um, you know, Matthew Syed and Rebel Ideas don't create a team where everyone's the same. I think that's really important. So try and work with, people with different views and diverse ways of thinking that will complement your strengths. Work in your own way. Talk to people. Go out and find out about different ways of doing things. I think maybe early on in our careers, we have a real view of you do it in this way. And I think we want to go and talk to people and say, well, how have you done it? And if you don't agree with it, try and work out how it's worked for them, but don't just immediately, think it's not valid. Try and look at how different people work and see what little golden nuggets you can take with them while not trying to replicate, not try and copy, but what are the golden nuggets in there that you think might add to your armory, your range of skills as a school improvement leader. Yeah, it's not easy. And I think the last thing is find trusted people that you can talk to and reflect with. So whether they are people at home, whether they're friends, whether that's fellow educationalists. But I think we all need that view reflected back to us. Somebody who can kind of say, no, just got to keep going. You're doing a good job. And equally, times where I think you're just digging that tunnel, you're digging that hole. Maybe you need to stop, have a rethink, because all you're going to do is get deeper and deeper, and you're not going to get there. And so, talk to people, get honest opinions, and be prepared to change. You can't just keep going. Sometimes you have to change and look at doing things in a different way.
Thank you, Paul. That's fantastic. I think you've given us an awful lot of golden nuggets in this half hour. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.